Story number 1. I was barely 20 when the shadows of 2001 stretched over my life, pulling me into a realm of terror I never believed could exist. It all began when my grandmother, a woman whose eyes had seen the rise and fall of empires, called me to her side. Her voice, usually so firm despite her age, trembled as she spoke of her time with NASA during the Apollo missions. She told me of the Void Whisperers. I always knew my grandmother had worked in a secretive division of NASA, but she'd never spoken of it, not until that evening. As a communications expert, she had been part of a team listening to the signals from space, ensuring the safety of the astronauts venturing into the unknown. But amongst the static and beeps, they intercepted something else, voices that seemed to bubble up from the abyss of space itself. The first time she heard them, it was in the dead of night. A series of whispers in a language not quite human, not quite machine, crackling over the radio. She recounted the chills that raced down her spine as her team sat frozen, listening to the unintelligible murmurs. Then came the countdown, a sequence of numbers in a chilling monotone that terminated in a scream so distant, yet so visceral, that it haunted her sleep for years. They never found the source. Driven by her stories, I found myself returning to our old house, nestled in a forgotten suburb where the echoes of those times still lingered. It stood, a decaying testament to a life filled with secrets, its walls pulsing with silent screams of unknown entities. I wasn't alone. A group of friends, thrill seekers and ghost hunters, joined me: Alex, the skeptic; Sarah, the medium; Jake, the cameraman; and Lily, the researcher. We were a band of the curious, dancing on the edge of our own reality, hungry for a taste of the unknown. Our investigation started as a game, a dare to confront the ghosts of the past. But as night enveloped us, the air grew dense, electric with anticipation. We set up our equipment, hoping to catch a whisper, a shadow, or any sign that my grandmother's stories were more than the ramblings of old age. It didn't take long. Sarah was the first to feel it. A pressure in the air, a static charge that made the hairs on our arms stand on end. Then, the voices started, a cacophony of whispers that filled the empty rooms, seeking an audience to their cryptic chants. We recorded it all, the sounds growing in intensity, until Alex, always the doubter, began to pale, his eyes reflecting a fear he could not verbalize. It was real. The Void Whisperers were not just stories, they were amongst us. Lily, her face lit by the glow of her laptop, suddenly gasped. The screen showed a countdown, like the one my grandmother described. We huddled together, watching as the numbers ticked down, our breaths held captive by rising dread. 10, 9, 8. The countdown ended, but instead of a scream, there was silence, a silence so heavy, it crushed. Then, a voice, not from the speakers, but in the room, whispered a single word that froze our blood. Leave. We didn't hesitate. Driving away, I looked back at the house through the rearview mirror, half expecting it to have vanished. It stood there, silent and brooding. It was a night of unexplained phenomena, of whispered secrets and half-glimpsed shadows that slithered through the darkness. The recordings vanished, erased by an unseen hand, but the memories remained. We spoke little of it afterwards, each of us carrying the weight of that night alone. I've never returned to that house, nor has my grandmother spoken of the Void Whisperers again. Yet, some nights, when the world is quiet and the veil between then and now grows thin, I hear the whispers creeping into my dreams, a ghostly reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Story number 2. In the languid heat of the 2002 summer, the world seemed to sway gently like the elm trees lining the streets of our sleepy suburb. I was returning from college, a head full of knowledge and a heart yearning for the next adventure. That's when my grandmother, frail but with eyes like steel traps, drew me into her orbit with a tale that would consume the very fabric of my reality. The shadow on the moon, she called it. As an engineer for lunar rovers, she'd seen things, she confided, that were meant to stay buried in the lunar dust. Among them was footage from an Apollo mission so chilling that NASA buried it in the shadows of national security. A persistent, unexplained shadow trailed the astronauts, visible only to the rover's cameras, but as absent to the astronauts' eyes as silence in the void of space. With hands that remembered the fear more vividly than they recalled the passage of time, she handed me a rusty key to a hidden compartment in her attic. There, amidst relics of a bygone era, were the lost tapes. I called them the true believers and the skeptics alike, my friends who shared a hunger for the unexplained. There was Noah, the documentarian whose camera was a shield against the world's lies. Mia, the tech-savvy cynic. Eli, whose degree in psychology had yet to explain away the shadows that lingered after dreams. And Zoe, the freelance writer who lived for the stories that made you question the dark. We gathered around the dusty projector in the attic, its light cutting through the darkness like a signal fire calling to the unknown. The tapes were to life, and the moon's desolate beauty filled the screen. We watched, breaths held tight, as the astronauts worked, oblivious to the dark figure that moved with them, an ever-present sentinel. Our investigation began as a challenge against the unknown, a ripple against the calm surface of our reality. Noah's camera rolled, capturing our reactions, the debates that raged long into the night. The tapes defied science, and Eli's attempts at rational explanations grew thinner with each viewing. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Mia set up digital recorders, her skepticism waning as the chilling feeling of being observed grew more palpable. We pored over the tapes, pausing, rewinding, the shadow ever there yet impossibly absent when the astronauts looked back. Then, Zoe vanished. One moment she was beside us, the next, just a scream from the darkness above. We rushed upstairs, the attic empty, the projector flickering as if it too questioned its reality. We found her outside, her skin pale in the moonlight, eyes vacant, whispering of whispers that called from the dark side of the moon. She spoke of a cult, the Lunar Watchers, devil worshippers who believed in the sanctity of that persistent shadow, who had followed the tapes to their new home. One by one, unexplained deaths followed, each marked by a lunar cycle that left the police baffled and the town gripped in a paralyzing fear. The tapes became our curse, and the shadow on the moon, a specter that haunted our waking hours. Eli was the last to go, his body found as if drained of life, a look of horror forever etched upon his face as if he gazed into the abyss and found it gazing back. I was driving away from that cursed suburb, the tapes a heavy weight in the trunk of the car. The project was supposed to evoke emotion, but not like this, not this cocktail of fear and loss. The whispers still come from me, in the static of radios, in the flickering of shadows. Noah's camera was found by the side of the road, its footage mysteriously erased. But the shadow, it's always there, at the edge of vision, a darkness that the light of reason cannot dispel. It's a creepypasta come to life, a story to chill the blood and remind you that some truths are better left lost in the silence of space. Story number 3. It was the autumn of 2003, a season where life and death danced in the falling leaves, and I was walking the line between both worlds, unaware of the abyss beneath my feet. My grandmother, with her voice as fragile as the dying leaves but eyes burning with an otherworldly fire, beckoned me into her confidence. Her tales from NASA were not of stars and planets, but of something that dwelled in the spaces between. Project Echo. She had been part of a classified project, her team casting complex signals into the cosmos like nets into the ocean's depths. To their horror, they caught something. Echoes returned, carrying within them messages and predictions, speaking of things that were to come. Some, she whispered, had terrifyingly come true. My blood ran cold as she recounted the disasters and deaths foretold by these cosmic whispers, her words painting a tapestry of terror that hung over my reality, distorting it. Compelled by a need to understand, I gathered my closest friends. Ava, whose degree in astrophysics made her our anchor to reality, Mark, the budding investigative journalist, Hannah, who believed her spiritual sensitivity could provide insight, and Tyler, the tech genius who could make sense of the signals if anyone could. We were a quintet of curiosity, not knowing that some tunes are not meant to be played. Tyler managed to uncover an old reel in a decommissioned part of the NASA archives, a recording of the echoes. It crackled to life in his makeshift lab, our eager eyes and ears leaning into the past. The tape was a cacophony of sounds, a symphony of the unnatural, which Tyler decrypted into a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with an otherworldly intelligence. Ava's face blanched as she recognized patterns in the chaos, the predictions of calamities that had since come to pass. Mark scribbled notes, the beginnings of terror etching into his features as the implications became clear. I was driving us back from Tyler's lab when the car filled with static from the radio, despite it being off. Hannah gasped, her voice trembling, as she claimed to feel a presence, an intangible pressure that seemed to be closing in on us. In the following days, each of us experienced horrors that defied explanation. Ava's calculations led her to predict a small-scale natural disaster that came to pass, and she withdrew into herself, terrified of the implications. Mark reported on the peculiar pattern of unexplained deaths in the suburb, only to find a hidden connection. Each of the deceased had been involved with Project Echo in some capacity. Then Tyler vanished. The only sign of him was a mess of papers and drives, etched with the same cryptic patterns Ava had found, and a recording of a new message, one that predicted an event of catastrophic proportions. I was walking to my grandmother's house when I found her frail body slumped over her desk, an echo of the recordings playing. It whispered of a return, something sent back to us, an intelligence that had been listening and was now on its way. Hannah disappeared next, leaving behind a room filled with scribbled notes and symbols that mirrored the patterns we had seen. She had been deep into spiritual protection rites, but whatever she feared had evidently found her. The suburb fell into chaos, as though the very fabric of our reality had begun to unravel. Shadows lingered too long, electronics malfunctioned with chilling regularity, and the people spoke in hushed tones of the things they saw in the corner of their vision. Mark, in his final article, called it the Echo phenomenon, tying the strange events to Project Echo, but the article was never published. The night before it was to go to press, he was found, lifeless with an expression of utter terror, clutching a manuscript that never saw the light of day. Now, it's just me. I sit here, recounting these events, a lone survivor in a town that whispers of shadows and echoes. The predictions continue, and with each one that comes true, the world seems to hold its breath. There's talk of making a creepypasta out of our story, a tale to terrify the masses. But this is no fiction. It's a warning. We sent a message into the void, and the void has answered. I can hear the static building again, the whispers growing louder. The echo is here, and I fear what has been sent back is not just a message, but something far more ancient and malevolent. The echoes have predicted their own arrival, and I am powerless to stop what comes next. Story number 4. I was sifting through the attic clutter when her voice, brittle as autumn leaves, beckoned me. My grandmother, wrapped in shawls and secrets, a former NASA communications officer, began to unravel a story that had been tightly wound within her for years. It was about the forgotten astronaut, a man who touched the stars and came back haunted. His name was Michael Hadden, a name erased from NASA's annals, as if he was nothing more than a smudge to be wiped clean. My grandmother's tales of his exploits were spoken in hushed tones, as if the very walls might recoil in horror. I was driving through our small town when I felt the gravity of his story pulling me, demanding an investigation. With my friends, Lila, an aspiring filmmaker, Alex, a history buff with a penchant for conspiracy theories, Jenna, a psychology student intrigued by the human mind's fragility, and Sean, an amateur astronomer with his eyes always on the sky, we began to stitch together the narrative of Michael Hadden. Grandma's stories were a tapestry of terror and wonder of an astronaut who, on a routine spacewalk, whispered of seeing eyes in the darkness beyond the Earth's curvature. When he returned, something in him had shifted. His gaze was ever fixated on the stars, his speech laced with cryptic references to them waiting in the void. Lila captured every recounted memory on her camera, her lens focusing on the faint tremble of my grandmother's lip, the faraway look in her eyes as she spoke of Michael's last visit. The visit before he vanished. Alex scoured through the archive newspapers and found an article about an unexplained phenomenon in 2004, where townsfolk reported seeing strange lights and experiencing lost time. He connected it to the period when Michael returned. I was walking through the public library's old records when I found a hastily redacted file on Project Orion, a program that predated Michael's final mission. Notes scribbled in the margins spoke of an anomaly encountered during a spacewalk. Jenna's interest peaked when she interviewed my grandmother, trying to understand Michael's psychological state post-encounter. Through trembling words, Grandma described his paranoia, his fear of being watched, in the most chilling detail. His shadow seemed to move on its own. Sean set up his telescope, aiming to capture any abnormal celestial activity. Instead, he recorded inexplicable shadowy forms that moved across the lens, defying explanation. One night, Lila's footage showed more than our interviews. The camera, left recording after hours, captured a shadow detaching itself from the corner of Grandma's living room, stretching and shrinking in unnatural ways. I was reading through Michael's letters to my grandmother when the atmosphere shifted. The air became charged, the room colder, as if something unseen had stepped into our midst. Jenna, usually composed, screamed as she claimed to feel an icy hand grip her heart, leaving her breathless. The investigation was no longer just a hunt for truth. We were stalked by something intangible. Alex disappeared, his room left in disarray, his computer screen filled with a looping sequence of the stars as seen on the night Michael reported the eyes. Lila's footage began to corrupt, except for the frame showing the shifting shadow. And one by one, our group fell apart, succumbing to accidents and vanishings that the police shrugged off as coincidental. Now, as I sit here, the last of our group, I'm left with a pile of unsent letters from Michael to my grandmother, detailing his descent into madness. He spoke of a cosmic horror, an entity that latched onto his soul in the vacuum of space, an entity he brought back to Earth. Sean was the last to go, his body found under the open sky, his eyes eternally gazing upwards, mouth agape as if screaming at the stars. I'm alone now, sharing this story with trembling hands. There's a knock on the door, a shadow under the frame. The forgotten astronaut may have been erased from history, but the horror he brought back refuses to be forgotten. It's here, perhaps for me, as a voice that sounds like static whispers through the cracks in my house, promising a reunion among the stars. This tale, ready-made for a creepypasta, is more than just a story. It's a warning. Some truths are too heavy for the human mind, some horrors too profound for our reality to contain. The forgotten astronaut may have vanished, but the echo of his encounter with the cosmic horror will linger long after the stars have gone out. Story number 5. I remember it was a chilled October evening when the whispers of my grandmother's past seeped into my reality. She was a reticent woman who'd spent her younger years nestled within the secretive arms of NASA. That night, under the flickering light of her old lamp, she shared the tale of the vanishing pod, a story that would become my obsession. She recounted the Skylab missions with a quiver in her voice, her pale hands clutching a tea that had long since gone cold. She revealed there was a fourth pod, its existence scrubbed from the public records. Its pilot, a man named Captain Jonathan Reed, was part of a psychological experiment. But the pod, along with Reed, vanished from tracking systems for 48 hours. When it reappeared, Reed was inside, his body weathered as if he'd aged decades, and his voice uttering the sounds of no earthly language. NASA quarantined him, and my grandmother never saw him again. Compelled to unearth the truth, I, along with my friends, Zara, a linguistics major, Evan, a tech-savvy hacker, Leah, a journalism student, and Marco, a medical student, began to delve into the abyss that is this untold chapter of space history. I was driving to the local library when Zara called me, her voice shaking with excitement. She decoded part of the language Reed spoke. It wasn't just alien, it was ancient, predating known civilizations. Evan managed to hack into confidential archives, only to discover a classified audio recording of Reed's debriefing. The quality was poor, but the fear in Reed's voice was crystal clear. I was walking through Reed's now abandoned hometown, with Leah filming the journey. The place had an aura of loss and secrecy, as if the town itself was trying to erase the memory of the vanishing pod. We interviewed elders who spoke of Reed as a local legend, the man who touched the void and was touched in return. Marco's medical opinion was that Reed's aging couldn't be explained by any known condition or disease. It was as if his very essence had been accelerated through time. One night, as we reviewed our findings, the air around us chilled, and our equipment began to fail. Evan's monitors flickered with images not of our world, showing glimpses of what looked like an ancient, cosmic city. Zara was the first to succumb. She was found the next morning, aged like Reed, her last words in the same alien tongue. We were too late. The phenomenon that had claimed Reed was now claiming us. I was sitting alone, after Leah and Marco disappeared, frantically searching through Reed's interview transcripts where I found a recurring phrase that Zara had translated: "They await at the threshold." I heard Evan scream from his room. Rushing over, I found his body withered, his eyes wide with horror. The screen before him displayed a countdown, and I felt an otherworldly presence envelop me. I'm now alone, recording this with the hope that someone will find it. The air is heavy with the echo of an ancient chant, and I feel my life being pulled from me. The vanishing pod was not just an experiment, it was a contact. And now, as I look at my hands, I see the wrinkles forming, my skin sagging, the very years being ripped away from me. I am disappearing, just like the pod and my friends, into the gaping maw of something that should have remained undisturbed. Reed was not just an astronaut, he was a harbinger, and I fear that by tracing his path, I have invited the attention of those who wait at the threshold. I can hear them now, the whispers of ancients, as I age with every breath I take. This suburb, this once peaceful place, is now a nexus for the horrors that lurk between the stars. The Vanishing Pod, a creepypasta born from the throes of my grandmother's tales, is the last testament to our folly. Our search for knowledge has awakened something eternal, and it does not forget, nor forgive. I leave this story as a warning. There are things in the cosmos that are beyond our understanding, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Story number 6. In 2006, I was a fledgling filmmaker with a penchant for the mysterious and the morbid. My grandmother, whose lucidity wavered under the weight of her 90 years, would often recount tales from her time at NASA. Her stories were tinged with the inexplicable, but none were as chilling as the Gemini incident. She had once shown me a dusty reel labeled with those very words. It contained footage of an astronaut, whom she called Lieutenant Michael Harris, his eyes wide with a mix of wonder and terror. On the tape, he claimed to see faces in the stars, faces that were looking right back at us with an inquisitive glare. Following the mission, Harris's mental health spiraled. He became obsessed with the Watchers, as he called them. I was driving back to my hometown, the suburban backdrop a stark contrast to the cosmic enigma I was about to unravel. My childhood friends, Danny, a local reporter, Emily, a psychologist, Lucas, a conspiracy theorist, and Olivia, an amateur historian, had agreed to help me dig deeper into the Gemini incident. The late-night meetings in Danny's garage, surrounded by piles of newspaper clippings and the hum of old projectors, became our secret conclave. Emily provided insights into Harris's psychological decline, suggesting that his visions were too consistent, too vivid to be mere hallucinations. Lucas spun theories of ancient alien surveillance, tying the Watchers to civilizations long extinct. Olivia discovered a forgotten astronaut, his existence wiped from NASA records, much like the story my grandmother had shared. I was walking through the same steps that Harris had taken before his last mission, visiting the abandoned launch sites and training facilities. Each place felt haunted by the ghost of space travel's forgotten war. Strange occurrences began to manifest. Danny received anonymous tips pointing to classified documents, only to find his sources silenced or worse. I was woken up at night by tapping on my window, a pattern that mirrored the constellations. Then, tragedy struck. I was walking into Danny's garage when I found him, slumped over his desk, an empty look in his eyes. The coroner concluded it was an aneurysm, but we couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen something he wasn't supposed to. Lucas vanished next. His room was covered in celestial maps, pins and strings connecting stars into an intricate web with a note that read, "They're watching us from there." Emily, gripped by paranoia, refused to leave her house, whispering about eyes that followed her in her dreams. And Olivia, she found a symbol in an ancient text that matched a constellation, a symbol of a cult that worshipped celestial entities. I'm the last one left. I sit here, recording this, because I feel a presence looming over me. When I look at the stars now, I feel them probing, searching, watching. My grandmother's stories, once so distant, now feel like premonitions. I can't shake the image of those faces that Harris saw, the faces that now haunt my every dream. The Gemini incident wasn't just a mission, it was a contact, a bridge to entities that humanity was not ready to meet. This suburb was supposed to be a haven, a place far from the dark corners of the earth. But we were wrong. It is not about where you are, but what you are looking for. And if you look too deeply into the cosmos, you'll find that sometimes, it stares back. I hear whispers at night, calling me by name, echoing Harris's words about the Watchers. My time is running out. This story, this documentation, it's all that will remain. The Gemini incident will become another creepypasta, a story told in hushed tones to scare the curious away from the truth that there are things out there, beyond our understanding, that are very much aware of us. If you find this, if you're listening, heed my warning, close your eyes to the stars. Ignore their calling. For if they notice you, there is no escape from the gaze of the Watchers. Story number 7. In the sultry summer of 2007, I returned to the dust-strewn suburb where my grandmother's tales had first instilled a mixture of fear and wonder in my heart. Among her many unsettling stories from her NASA days, one particularly harrowing account had always clawed at the edges of my reason. It was about the Mars rovers, and a whispering voice that bore her name through the cosmic void. I was driving down the familiar yet foreboding lane to my childhood home when the reality of her words truly sank in. Over the years, my skepticism had turned to intrigue, which had then morphed into an obsession with uncovering the truth. Accompanying me were friends, all under the specter of 30 and all inexplicably drawn to the unknown: Alex, an audio engineer; Rachel, a linguist; Josh, a software developer with a knack for hacking; and Sarah, a journalist with the kind of curiosity that often invited trouble. As I was walking through my grandmother's attic, the same space where she'd spent countless hours with her headset on, I found her old logs. They spoke of a whisper that sliced through static, a voice so personal and intimate that it seemed to caress her name. According to her, it delivered messages that bore secrets no one else knew, whispers of her past, her regrets, and her fears. Alex set up his equipment in the same spot where my grandmother had worked, connecting old tapes to modern software, trying to isolate the voice. I was sitting with Rachel as she pored over the logs, her brow furrowed in concentration, deciphering the context of the whispers. Our investigation led us to a chilling discovery. Josh had managed to access a forgotten NASA transmission log dated around the same time as the anomalies. It referenced a communication failure, a brief blackout where no data was transmitted back to Earth. It was during this blackout that the whisper first began. The nights grew long and fraught with tension. We heard the voice ourselves one evening, a distant whisper over the static, uttering Rachel's name. It sent shivers through our spines, an ethereal call that knew far too much. The terror that gripped us was visceral, but it bound us together even tighter. One by one, however, our group began to unravel. Alex, tormented by the whispers that followed him even beyond the attic, succumbed to a silence of his own, found motionless one morning with no discernible cause. Rachel began speaking in a language that was unrecognizable, a dialect that seemed ancient and alien yet was spoken with a familiarity that suggested she understood every word. Josh disappeared from his home, leaving behind his laptop which displayed a live feed from the rover, now stationary on Mars's barren landscape. On the screen, among the desolate red terrain, was a shadow that seemed to move independently of any rover's command. I was walking towards Sarah's place when I found her in her garden, her gaze vacant, muttering about the voices of Mars that promised her the universe. But her voice had taken on the same whisper quality, and her words slipped through the air like a serpent's hiss. The authorities called it a series of unexplained phenomena. The media spun tales of devil worship and paranormal obsessions gone awry. But as I sit here, recording this, I understand that we have pried open a door that was meant to remain closed. We've tuned into a frequency that resonates with something ancient and malevolent on Mars, a whispering entity that knows us, calls to us, and draws us in with a siren song that is personal, intimate, and ultimately lethal. I implore anyone who finds this account, do not listen to the whispers. Ignore the urge to uncover what lies beneath the static. There are things out there, on the red planet and beyond, that whisper your name not in welcome, but as an invitation to an inescapable abyss. And once you've heard the red planet's whisper, it is already far too late. Story number 8. It was an autumn evening in 2008 when I was driving back to the old suburb where I had spent my childhood summers listening to my grandmother's chilling tales from her time at NASA. She had passed away by then, leaving behind her journals filled with cryptic notes and stories. Among these, a particular account always haunted me, the time displacement experiment. In her journal, she had scribbled about a forbidden experiment aboard the ISS. A device that could manipulate time itself within a localized field. She mentioned a test subject, a mouse, which after being exposed to the device, disappeared from its secure enclosure only to reappear moments later, aged drastically, its fur shockingly white. My grandmother had written, "What are the implications of such a device on a human being?" I was walking through my grandmother's house, now left to me, when I stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside, I found a trove of classified documents and a small, peculiar device resembling her descriptions. The decision to investigate further was unanimous among my friends: Mike, a physics student; Emily, an aspiring documentarian; Lucas, a conspiracy theorist and blogger; and Zoe, a medical student intrigued by the biological implications of time manipulation. As Mike examined the device, fascinated by its intricate design and unknown symbols, I noticed a tension creeping into the air, thick and palpable. Emily had her camera out, documenting each step, her hands trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. Lucas was piecing together a timeline on his laptop, linking the experiment to a series of unexplained phenomena around the world. We decided to replicate the experiment on a smaller scale, using a plant as our test subject. Zoe was hesitant, voicing the ethical concerns, but curiosity overwhelmed us. I can still hear the sound of the device powering up, a low hum that grew into a high-pitched whine. The plant vanished before our eyes, and for a moment, silence enveloped us. Seconds later, the plant reappeared, its life cycle accelerated, leaves wilted and decayed. But it wasn't the transformation of the plant that froze us, it was the sudden, chilling age in Zoe's eyes as she whispered, "I saw the future, and it's looking back at us." Following that night, unexplained deaths began to plague our town. Each victim was found aged beyond their years, their faces contorted in an expression of sheer terror. The device had gone missing, and with each death, a whisper circulated of a shadowy figure, its form blurry, as if displaced in time. Lucas was the first of us to go. He was found in his room, his laptop displaying a cascade of historical disasters that had suddenly appeared in recent times, his body old and withered. Emily's footage was discovered in her abandoned car, the last frame showing a blinding light and her screaming about seeing the end of days. Mike vanished, and all that was left behind was a thesis on time paradoxes and the dangers of their unraveling. Zoe withdrew from the world, her sanity unraveled by the visions she couldn't unsee, whispering about the time echoes that haunt her. I am now writing this as a warning, the burden of knowledge weighing heavily on me. I was driving away from the horror that my grandmother's legacy had unearthed, but there's a realization that chills me to the bone. You cannot outrun time. There are whispers in the air, whispers from a future that is intruding upon the present, and I fear that the shadow I see flickering in the corner of my eye is not a trick of the light, but a harbinger of the unspeakable horrors yet to come. If you find this account, understand that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. The fabric of time is not to be tampered with, and the echoes of tomorrow are not meant to be heard today. Fear the experiment that bends time, for it also bends reality, and what comes through the folds may well be the end of us all. Story number 9. It happened to me in the spring of 2009, an unnerving series of events that would etch themselves permanently into the crevices of my mind. I was living in a quiet suburb, where the most excitement we had was the annual county fair. That was until I unearthed a family secret that sent shivers down the spine of our sleepy town. My grandmother, who had worked for NASA during the Apollo missions, often hummed an eerie melody that she said was inspired by a classified recording from the dark side of the moon. She described it as a woman's voice, singing a lullaby in an unrecognizable language. With her passing, those tunes should have faded into memory, but they seemed to become more prevalent around the house, seeping through the walls like a chilling draft. One day, while I was sorting through her belongings, I found an old tape recorder labeled Lunar Lullabies. Driven by a mix of nostalgia and curiosity, I pressed play. The melody that flowed was hauntingly beautiful, yet filled with an immeasurable sadness. It was then that I made the mistake of sharing this discovery with my friends, Anna, a linguist, Josh, an amateur astronomer, Sarah, a local journalist, and Derek, who had an obsession with the occult. Josh was fascinated by the recording, playing it repeatedly, trying to capture the frequency of the sound. Anna was convinced the language could be deciphered and tirelessly worked on breaking down the phonetic structure. Sarah started an investigative report on the subject, while Derek delved into ancient lore, suggesting the possibility of a lunar deity's curse. We gathered at my place one evening to discuss our findings. That night, I was walking Sarah to her car when she confessed to having nightmares ever since she heard the lullaby, visions of being stranded on the moon's surface, the Earth a blue dot in the vastness of space, unreachable. She wasn't alone, we all had them. Derek proposed an idea that sent chills down my spine, to perform a ritual that he believed would connect us with the entity from the recording. He said it could offer us protection or answers. Desperation overrode skepticism, and I agreed, hoping it would end our shared torment. The ritual took place at Josh's observatory, under the light of a full moon. We played the recording as Derek chanted incantations. But something went horribly wrong. A cold gust swept through the room, and the stars seemed to disappear from the sky, plunging us into an abyssal darkness. It happened in a blink. Derek began convulsing, his eyes rolling back as he spoke in the same ancient, alien language from the recording. Sarah screamed, running into the night, never to be seen again. Josh was found the next morning, catatonic, staring at the sky where the moon should have been, but it wasn't there. I was driving frantically away from that place, the lullaby playing in an endless loop in my head. As I looked back, a dense fog had settled over the observatory, concealing it from view as if it never existed. It's been years since that night, and the nightmares still haunt me. The melody lingers, a reminder of something ancient and forgotten that we had awakened. Every full moon, I sense a presence, as if something is calling out, longing to be heard. People have tried to make sense of the unexplained deaths and the disappearances in our town. But the truth is far more terrifying than any story they come up with. There are things out there, in the vastness of space, that are beyond our understanding. And there are lullabies that should never be sung, for they are not meant for human ears. Whatever we heard, it was not just a song, it was a siren call from the depths of the cosmos, and we answered it.